is a television miniseries that originally aired in 1973 and stars William Holden, Sam Elliott, Lee Remick, and Joe Santos. It was directed by Robert Butler and was adapted from a 1972 novel of the same name. The story centers around a veteran LAPD officer, Bumper Morgan, and follows him as he navigates his last week on the job before he retires. I realize that's a very brief summary for the plot of a miniseries, but I think it's fitting. The movie, and I'll call it a movie because I watched it all in one sitting, doesn't focus on any one thing. It's like a novel, which makes sense in that it contains a lot of different plot elements. He's got a girlfriend that he's hoping to settle down with and marry once he's retired. He's desperate to solve one last murder before he's off the beat. He's contending with thugs on the street. And the film deals with all of these in stride, and the whole mammoth film hangs on the shoulders of its star, William Holden. I want to talk about William Holden because, like Joseph Cotten, I believe he's one of those classic actors that isn't quite as well remembered as he should be. Of course, in his heyday, he did win a Best Actor Oscar for Stalag 17, but nowadays I feel like a lot of his other acclaimed and popular films are remembered for other reasons. With something like Sunset Boulevard, everyone remembers Mr. DeMille, I'm Ready for My Close-Up, or The Bridge on the River Kwai, people remember Alec Guinness and that incredible climactic explosion. The Wild Bunch is famously one of the most violent westerns, if not one of the most violent films ever made, especially for that time. And when they're released on DVD or Blu-ray, something like The Horse Soldiers advertises only John Wayne, or with Sabrina, it's part of the Audrey Hepburn collection, for example. People probably wouldn't classify any of these movies typically as William Holden movies, but he is great and memorable in all of them. So I wanted to spotlight a movie that is truly his, and really his alone. His portrayal of Bumper Morgan is amazing, and all I could think while watching it was how easily he kind of disappears into the part, but never in a showy way where you think he's trying to play something way against type. Maybe the better way to describe it is to say you can never tell where William Holden leaves off and Morgan begins, and vice versa. He just is. The role was so perfect for this time of his life and career. His weathered features fit the world-weary and experienced character so well. But a lot of it is in the writing and the dialogue and the way this character is built. Bumper Morgan is a beat cop, and that seems to be how he likes it. It's been his whole career, and the same way that he has stuck to the same job for so long. A big part of his character is his resistance to change. There are several things that illustrate this, like how he doesn't like to use the radio in his police car, which got me wondering when radios became commonplace for patrol cars, because Morgan is very much against them. His sergeant almost pleads with him just to keep it turned on, but as Morgan tells him at one point, the only good bus he's ever had is while he's walking the beat, or words to that effect. There are little things too, like a brief scene where Morgan contemplates finally putting on the newer style of cap that the rest of the younger officers are wearing, but discards it and continues on with his usual choice. I loved all those touches, showing us that this is a man who is set in his ways, but is not really portrayed as a detriment. He's arguably the most efficient cop in the movie, and definitely the most experienced. I also love the feel of the movie, where his habit of getting out of his car and just walking the beat is shown, and it's shown why it's effective. He knows everyone on the street, on both sides of the law, and just as importantly, everyone knows him. He's a fixture for these people. They know him, they trust him, and everyone has a history together of some kind. That familiar feeling like we're watching real people and how they might interact was really great. And again, William Holden is the glue that holds it all together. His reactions when these people come up to him are so great to really pay attention to. You can tell instantly whether he just tolerates someone, whether he really does like them, or whether they go way back, and both of them wish they didn't. You can see in his face how he thinks through every decision and makes every judgment call. When he decides to let someone off easy this time, you can see him weigh it and then tell them how things are going to go. He's shown to be the last of the old school cops, and watching him, you almost wish that he wasn't, in some ways. I'm so used to seeing the police in shows or movies working in pairs, but not Morgan. He works alone every day, and frankly has no use for the younger officers that have filled up the station house around him. The difference between them is shown very starkly in a scene in the locker room after he's finished a shift. He's so clearly from a different era from the men around him. He has short hair, theirs is long and shaggy. He wears conservative dark gray suits, they wear loud colored shirts and bell-bottoms. And he just shakes his head. That scene gave me the feeling that maybe this character in some ways represented the stage William Holden was at in his career as well. Many of the actors of his generation had retired or nearly stopped working, and I'm sure he too was having a hard time finding work that he thought was suitable for him and his image. So maybe on the Hollywood scene as well, William Holden was looking around at the young filmmakers and actors that surrounded him and wondering whether he should continue with all this. The character of Bumper Morgan is by no means perfect. He cuts corners in his job and is shown to have maybe been around this sleazy neighborhood for too long, as he tries to justify some pretty big mistakes he has made. Specifically, there is a section where he has to testify at a trial for a man he arrested, and he does something that I would think goes against the type of man and cop that he is. This is definitely a flawed character, and the movie doesn't glorify his actions, but it just shows all sides of him. Also in the movie is Lee Remick, playing his girlfriend, actually basically his fiancée. He doesn't make a big show of proposing, they just decide they're going to get married. I thought Lee Remick was pretty good in her role. She's playing a university professor that has fallen in love with Morgan some time back. Of all the various plot threads going on through it, I found the one surrounding their relationship to be the least interesting to me. The first part is the age difference. Lee Remick is nearly 20 years his junior, but that's not really a big shock for movie couples, not now or back then. But I didn't really see them going together in general. But that dichotomy is actually put to good use in another scene demonstrating the difference he faces between himself and others. The two of them are invited to a party at the home of one of her fellow professors, and of course, college and university professors and a lot of students aren't exactly known as the most old-fashioned or conservative bunch. So the conversation quickly turns to Morgan's profession, and pretty soon everyone there has taken notice of this slightly heated discussion going on, and there too, Morgan is left looking around at a group that doesn't understand him and can't relate to his worldview. I appreciated those scenes because the reasons for his opinions and views on things are demonstrated while he's on the job, so we can get behind him. And when we see that he's really an outsider, both inside and outside the police force, it brings you to his side and makes the audience his only support. Because while his girlfriend tries to understand him, it's obvious she has her doubts that he'll even go through with retiring. He's become one with the job, and no one, including him, is sure he can actually leave it. Also in the cast is Sam Elliott, and this is Sam Elliott before he became the guy with that mustache and that voice that everyone knows. At this point in his career, he was just a working actor, guest starring in TV shows mostly. I wasn't too shocked to see him looking this young here. One of my favorite TV shows of all time is Mission Impossible, and he had a recurring role in season 5 of that show. So he looked quite similar, being clean-shaven and with a little bit shaggier hair. He plays the detective that arrives on the scene at the beginning of the movie, when Morgan discovers the body of a murdered woman, and then is the lead detective on the case. I thought his and William Holden's relationship was one of the best parts of the movie, in large part because of the subtlety of it. You can tell right from their first interaction that this is another younger cop that Morgan is not all that keen about having to work with. But the feeling is mutual. We get hints that Sam Elliott is not a fan of the way Morgan does his job, but none of it blows up into a big argument or terribly explicit dialogue. It's all hinted at in the performances, and watching their interactions get more tense and then gradually more filled with respect for one another was really well played and carefully paced. And finally for the cast, I just have to mention Joe Santos. This comparison is tenuous at best, but if it's Joe Santos playing any member of the LAPD, I just have to compare it to his most famous role, Dennis Becker in The Rockford Files. I've mentioned it before on this channel, but that is simply an amazing show, and anyone who has not or is not watching it needs to remedy that soon. back to this movie. I thought Joe Santos was excellent as Morgan's sergeant, who has apparently been hinting about retirement to Morgan for a while now, but finally wears him down near the start of this movie. He really seems to like him, and while he might give him a hard time about playing by the new rules, he still is obviously one of his better friends on the force, and there too, it was a good relationship. Not overly sentimental, but shown realistically, where a man that was likely a rookie under Morgan at one point in time is now his superior, but still feels a certain degree of deference to him. Overall, really strong performances all around. I thought the movie was really nicely shot, and seems to be almost entirely on location in Los Angeles, and that contributed a lot to the gritty feel it's going for. There are a great many scenes set at sunrise and sunset, and those all were very nicely shot. The scenes of driving around through the city felt a lot like an episode of Mannix or, again, The Rockford Files, and I kind of liked that familiar feel. Probably because it was based on a novel, I really loved the script as well. There's a lot of clipped, staccato dialogue where people almost have a shorthand with one another, whether that's between cops or between cops and the people they run into on the street. Part of that is that it was made in the 70s. There's a lot of 70s slang and cop jargon being thrown around, and I probably didn't get all of it, but I didn't mind. I actually enjoy trying to figure it all out from context, and the reason I like that is that the movie doesn't feel like it's having to hold my hand as we go through it. I've just stepped into a fully formed, functioning, and foreign past world to me, and I'm catching up and then following along. The score was by Nelson Riddle, a major composer for TV series in the 1960s and 70s in particular, and I thought it was pretty good. A little bit generic, it had the sound and feel of pretty typical music from any number of 70s shows, but it fit this movie. I guess I was also thinking that with the somewhat episodic nature of the story, it was almost like an extremely elongated episode of Adam 12 or something like that, but with that murder plot running through it. As I've mentioned, this was originally aired on TV as a miniseries. I believe it was originally 4 parts, but on the Blu-ray I watched, it is basically divided into 2 sections. Like I said at the beginning, I watched it all at once, and it really didn't feel too long to me. For the most part, it does have very deliberate pacing. I will say there are a couple of parts that did feel a little meandering to me. Specifically, there's a subplot regarding a newly retired cop played by Vic Tayback. There are a couple of scenes he has with William Holden that do go on for way too long, and the movie felt like it was starting to lose its way a little. In them, William Holden tells a lengthy story that was not terribly edifying and definitely doesn't endear Bumper to the audience at that point. I get why it's there, to sow more doubts in Morgan's mind about whether retirement is a good idea after all, but it was a bit much and might have been a little bit of padding to hit that miniseries length. That length, though, is overall a good thing. The movie is above all else a character study, and that runtime gives the whole thing room to breathe and really delve into Bumper Morgan. I got a bit of a feel, too, that it was a little similar in some respects to The Shootist. Obviously, this came before, but William Holden had one line that really made me draw that comparison after someone asked him what he's up to in his final week, and he says something about saying goodbye to all his friends and enemies. That one line of dialogue rang a familiar bell to me and had me making predictions about the end of this movie, which I won't get into here, but I like those one last job type of stories. This fits that subgenre only in the loosest sense, but I liked it. So overall, I thought this was a really strong film about a truly well-intentioned man who has taken the doing good for others and giving to them aspect of police work to heart. And despite some cynicism creeping in, he tries hard to hold on to that, because he feels that it really is his duty, even when some of these things go well beyond the actual call of duty. I would recommend this movie for most people, and especially if you have interest in or are a fan of William Holden. I believe this is one of his last great performances. As this was the 70s, they were allowing a couple questionable scenes to sneak in, even into things made for TV, so I wasn't a fan of that, but otherwise, check out The Blue Knight. You won't be disappointed. Thanks for watching this review, and if you enjoyed it, head on over to my channel, Hildebrand Productions. Adios for now.